Um, so Karen, how long have you lived in Fitzroy?
This time I've lived here for 3.5 years, but I did live in Fitzroy in the early 90s, in 91, 293, 4.
Yeah.
But the first time I came to Fitzroy was in 1977.
Wow.
Um, because when I was a teenager, I was a huge fan of Skyhook, so I came with a whole lot of other 15-year-old girls on a pilgrimage to see Red Simon's. So I lived in a two-storey terrace here, and I'd grown up in a sort of Edwardian seaside suburb, so that was my first ever experience of the inner city,
Yeah.
and I was totally shocked because it's such a different physical environment.
Yeah.
And coming from the kind of suburban space I came from, Fitzroy looked grungy and
Yeah.
really internalised, the claustrophobic and landlocked, and I think I was a bit shocked.
Yeah.
And then the next time I came back to Fitzroy was in the summer of 82, 83, when some friends of mine from uni moved to here.
Yeah.
And they lived over, I think, in George Street near Victoria Parade, and they lived in this amazing Victorian house that had these extraordinary renovations done to it in the 50s, and it was sort of like this huge baroque interior. And we went off to get some takeaway food, and there was only one place in Brunswick Street where we could get food from. And so it was, and then coming back in the late 80s and 90s and discovering that it was such a different place that had really changed. But
How had it changed?
well, obviously it had started to go through gentrification. So there were a lot more restaurants and bars and evidence of that kind of, I guess, middle class
Yeah.
culture. It's changed, obviously, even in the last 10 years, because when I came back in 91, I was living upstairs in an old garment factory space in Gertrude Street.
Yeah.
And then after we moved out, some people bought it, got an architect in who I knew, and it was renovated to a series of apartments.
Yeah.
So it's funny seeing that process, I guess, in the space of my own lifetime. But the
Yeah.
pace of gentrification is still slower here than, say, it is in St Kilda.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I'm thinking about why the pace has slowed down as well.
Mm. Well, why do you think St Kilda is gentrified more quickly?
I think it's partly to do with the location and the housing stock.
Yeah.
That it's much more amenable
Yeah.
to rapid gentrification, whereas Fitzroy's obviously still got quite a diverse
Yeah.
social base. And I
Yeah.
think it's great that the Ministry of Housing tower blocks are still here, because that's, in a way, that's like a particular stop on certain kinds of gentrification.
Yeah.
And
Because they have rent caps.
yeah,
Stuff like that means other people can live.
and it means that there's a sort of, in a way, an enforced social mix, because one of the things that gentrification does, just because of money,
Yeah.
is, people will come from different ethnic backgrounds, but the common denominator will be how much money you've got to move in, which
Yeah.
kind of controls the mix of people in that. So I
Yeah.
guess I like that fact about Fitzroy, that it's happening a little bit slowly.
Yeah. And I suppose St Kilda actually was gentrified like late 19th century too, as a seaside when Fitzroy's never really had that.
No, I guess Fitzroy's had that mix where it's obviously got large houses that belonged to people from the managerial class, but then also cheek by jowl were a whole lot of workers' cottages.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then there were factories like the McPherson Suite
Yeah.
factory, which is now back to apartments, so you had people living in proximity.
Yeah.
So that would have happened
Yeah.
too, but that's one of the things I like still about Fitzroy. It's a mixture of lots of students.
So where do you think that the garment factories, cordial factory, that's what McPherson was, where do you think they've gone?
Well, I believe that the garment industry in Australia has largely declined. People make garments offshore using cheaper labour.
Yeah. because it's very labour intensive.
Yeah, in so-called third world.
Yeah,
But I think there's still kind of backyard garment manufacturing and stuff. And there used to be until recently in Gertrude Street, where in little shop fronts the door would be open on a hot summer's day, and you'd look
Yeah.
inside and there'd be 6 people in there making up garments with sewing machines, and there'd be racks full of clothes. And that's just started to leak out, probably in about the early 90s, mid-90s as well.
yeah,
So, and you know, obviously because of the value of land, it's the easiest kind of business to have to get the return on your money is a bar industry.
mm,
So, I mean, that's one of the real problems, gentrification, the lack of diversity.
yeah. So you think there's too many bars and restaurants in in Fitzroy?
Yeah,
Like as a resident, as
I do.
somewhere to.
Much as I enjoy bars and restaurants and pubs, I think it's hard.
Yeah. So how come you decided to move back to Fitzroy?
Um, well, for personal reasons, I actually wanted to get away
Yeah.
from some people in St Kilda, so I decided to cross the river, because in Melbourne people hardly ever cross the river.
Yeah.
So if you come to the north side, you're going to be safe and you're going to run into
Yeah.
people from your neighbourhood. Proximity to work. I don't
Yeah.
drive.
Yeah.
I was working at Melbourne Uni, so I walk there. Now I work at BCA, so I catch the train. But also because I was a little distressed by the kind of monoculture that St Kilda was. And a lot of people that I used to know who lived in St Kilda had to move out because they couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
So, and I like the sense of community in Fitzroy, I guess.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people here. I socialise here, go out to cafes with friends.
Yeah.
And I like that feeling of being grounded in your own neighbourhood.
Yeah.
But maybe it just means I'm really insular as well, and I hardly ever get beyond Fitzroy. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Did you have a local pub in St Kilda?
I used to go to the Dalton Pub in Barclay Street, which was this great time capsule from the 70s.
Yeah.
And then they extended and renovated it, but by which time 70s decor had become fashionable, so they kept
Yeah.
some of it, but just means it's become a different place because it's not so seedy, dark material.
Yeah. So what sort of similarities do you think that St Kilda and Fitzroy? They seem to be equated as similar suburbs.
I guess probably since the late 70s, people have imagined St Kilda and Fitzroy as these kind of creative, bohemian
Yeah.
spaces that are dynamic spaces that have a strong nightlife, music culture.
Yeah.
And so they're always imagined kind of equivalence.
Yeah.
And also this kind of jargon that's become attached to them as being bohemian
Yeah.
places, which has now become part of the real estate marketing term. And what does bohemian mean? Well, sometimes it just meant that a whole lot of creative artists of all kinds moved in because the rents were cheap,
Yeah.
because they wanted to live in proximity and develop a kind of culture
Yeah.
of nightlife places to hang out, spaces in which to perform, to write.
Yeah.
But I've been working with someone who's working on a project which looks at the decline of artist studio space in inner cities across the world. It's now too expensive for most artists to rent studios in inner city locations.
Yeah.
So that whole dynamic that we've experienced in the 20th century, but mainly in the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s, of
Yeah.
artists moving into slightly run
Yeah.
city spaces is now changing.
Yeah. So that sort of hard, urbane art is moving to the suburbs.
Or people have studios at home,
Yeah.
or now so many people work with digital media where
Yeah.
they don't need the same kind of space,
Yeah.
which is, it's just a kind of significant cultural shift.
Yeah.
So, I guess it's that thing about that why does St Kilda and Fitzroy have an image of being 19th century buildings, slightly run with a whole lot of artists in that slightly see culture, sort of, I guess, slightly dangerous edge for some people. The kind of dark city at night.
Yeah.
romantic image. And it's interesting that that image lingers on a long time after the reality's changed.
Yeah.
But maybe that just shows how important those kind of images and stories to. Like I knew people who had started moving out of St Kilda in '86.
Yeah.
They were saying they were going to Fitzroy and another suburb of Fitzroy. And I was going, why are you moving there? And you know, of course, they were onto it earlier than everybody else.
Yeah. So they saw St Kilda as in decline.
Like they could no longer afford the rent as well.
Yeah.
You know, and that's why sometimes cynically some people call artists sort of leading edge of gentrification.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there's a marketing term for it where they're the kind of people who have been in search of cheap rents, slightly interesting run-down locations. And it's been a historical trend where they've moved first, and then it's the sort of first wave of gentrification. Then that suburb or place acquires an image and
And I suppose artists that are interested in sort of extreme lifestyles, engaging with the world in a tense way.
well, that's a romantic image of the artist. You could say that, or you could say that a primary need is financial.
Yeah.
Because they don't have a lot of spare cash and they needed space to live for.
Yeah.
And that's how the whole interest in living in lofts or warehouse spaces started, because a whole lot of artists in New York moved out to Soho, which had been the home of the garment manufacturing district, and those people moved out in the 60s and 70s, and artists just wanted really big spaces to paint, you know, because they were all making those huge canvases, spaces to paint work.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's a romantic image about needing to have an intense life, or it's probably financial. But I mean, I guess that's the thing that interests me, because I work in the arts of just kind of thinking about those kind of historical trends.
Okay. So do you think that, given the trajectory of gentrification, that it's going to be a less interesting place to live in the future, or become just another dormitory suburb?
It'll only be less interesting to me when my friends can't afford to live here.
Yeah.
And that's probably how I define it. But fortunately, it happens slowly because property booms come and go.
Yeah.
And now we've just finished one property boom, so it'll be another years before it starts.
Yeah.
Up again. Yeah, that's probably my kind of selfish definition. Interesting suburb that my friends are.
Yeah.
And when they can no longer afford to live, it won't be interesting.
Yeah. All right. Thanks very much, Karen.
Okay, is that enough?